I'm Noah Berger from the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. In this short video, we're going to look at taxes and the state budget in Massachusetts and examine some common perceptions and misperceptions. We'll look at some of the basic facts about the total level of taxes in Massachusetts, how that's changed over time, and how we compare it to other states. We're also, I think importantly, going to look at what we pay for with our taxes through the state budget, what are the things that government does, and how does that affect the quality of life in our communities and the future of our state economy. So to begin, education. Pre-K through 12 education, community colleges, state universities are all important for the families that take advantage of that education, but for our economy as well. Transportation, public transportation like subways and buses, but also the infrastructure that makes private transportation possible, the roads that we drive on, the sidewalks that we walk on, libraries, parks, playgrounds, swimming pools, things that we kind of take for granted, but it's nice to be able to take your child to the park on the weekend or the library after school, and that's an important part of our quality of life. Public safety, it's obviously a core government function to make sure that our communities are safe, that we have adequate police protection and fire protection. Clean air and safe drinking water. Our air is safe to breathe and our water is safe to drink because we have government agencies that help provide the environmental protection necessary to make that possible. Prisons and the courts, again, provide an important public safety function, but courts are also important to our economy to enforce contracts and deal with property issues. Healthcare and public health, a lot of our preventive public health programs, and our Medicaid program, which helps people of all ages, from young children who are able to see a doctor or go to the hospital if they need to senior citizens who, if they need to go into a nursing home, very few people can afford that on their own, and Medicaid often pays those costs for people of middle income. Human services, so a wide array of issues from our child protective services to services for people with developmental disabilities or mental health issues. So that's a quick overview of the things that our state and local governments provide. When we think about all the things that we do through government and pay for with state and local taxes, that's very much at the core of state budget and tax debates, because those discussions are really about the basic question of how much of our resources as a state should we be spending on those things like education, public safety, healthcare, transportation infrastructure that we do through government. And I often ask people when I make this presentation in person, what percent of our income, of our resources, do you think that we do currently commit to state and local taxes? Often people will guess 25%, 30%, 40%. The answer in Massachusetts, as this slide shows, is about 10.3%. That is, if you look at the total state and local taxes collected in Massachusetts, it's about 10.3% of all the income earned in the state. And as you can see on this slide, that's somewhat below the national average. This data, by the way, is the most recent available national data from 2008. There have been some increases in taxes both in Massachusetts and other states since then, but the basic pattern still holds. It's also important to note that while state and local taxes are the primary source of revenue for state and local governments, they also receive money from fees and federal revenue, which ultimately comes from federal taxes. Now, it's somewhat surprising to people to learn that we're a relatively low tax state because we have this label of Taxachusetts. So where does that Taxachusetts label comes from? The next slide helps to explain that. And if you look at this slide, it's in some ways a very similar measure. Again, we're looking at total state and local taxes as a percentage of total income, and that is the right way to compare among states because it includes state and local data and looks at our total resources to pay taxes. And as you see in this chart, it looks like we're a relatively high tax state, in fact, one of the higher tax states in the country. So why is that? Why is it that this chart seems to suggest we're a high tax state? The numbers we just looked at make it look like we're a low tax state. Well, the reason is this chart is actually our state and local tax system about 30 years ago in 1977. Back in the 1970s, Massachusetts was a relatively high tax state. That's when we got the label Taxachusetts. A lot has changed since the 1970s, but the label still seems to stick. And if you look at exactly what's changed, if you look at the change in overall taxes over those 30 years, we see that Massachusetts cut taxes more than any other state in the country over that period. It's due to two things. First, in about 1980, we had Proposition 2.5, which cut local property taxes significantly. And then, through several periods, but particularly in the late 1990s, the state began cutting the state-level taxes, particularly the income tax, very deeply. And as a result, we went from being a relatively high tax state, sort of went right through the middle of the pack and ended up as a fairly low tax state. And that's where we are today. And when we think about the fiscal crisis that the state is facing with budget cutbacks for local aid and education and much of the other basic services that government provides. Part of the reason for those cuts is that we have significantly less tax revenue than we had 15 years ago as a result of state policy choices to reduce particularly our income tax. So that's the quick overview of taxes in Massachusetts. I hope it's been helpful. If people would like additional resources, our webpage is massbudget.org, and if you click on the tax button on that page, it brings up a number of reports. At the top, there's our tax primer, which has all types of information about our tax system. And also there's a specific fact sheet on this question of Taxachusetts that provides more detail on a lot of the information that I've just provided in summary form. So I hope that was helpful, and please do visit our website. Thank you.